Hi, this is Mike Conlon, also known as the Main Street Millionaire. I'm glad you could join me today, and I'm going to talk to you about three things today, all concerning real estate. Number one is I want to give you a little background on myself and why I think I provide a different opinion and a different point of view that can really maybe help you understand your real estate investing a little bit better. And then the second thing I want to talk about is the easiest way to get into real estate. The number one thing every person should do is think about a 401k alternative by investing in 10 rental homes. It's super easy. Everybody can do it, and you're going to end up a millionaire regardless of what happens with your home. So I can talk to you about that. And third, I think most important, is I want to talk to you about how to make $100,000 a year from one mobile home park. 100 spaces, you can make $100,000 a year. Super exciting. It's a great business opportunity for people and also a great investment opportunity. So let's talk a little bit about why do you want to invest in mobile home parks. The interesting thing about the industry right now is that it's a supply and demand issue. There's only been so many mobile home parks built over the last couple of years. In fact, very few parks. And the demand for affordable housing is through the roof, especially since 2008, 2009. So you got a very limited supply and you got a huge demand for housing right now. And a lot of people look at mobile home park investing as the ugly stepchild of the real estate investment, sort of the bottom of the ladder where affordable housing is, where people go if they can't afford a house or some other type of apartment, whatever it may be. I love that type of investing because the demand is huge in good times and in bad times. And like I just said, the demand and supply issues are really in our favor right now. So I really would encourage you to look at the mobile home park investing world. The opportunity right now is great. I would caution you, just like on any type of real estate, and I've talked about this before, is that we're nearing the top of a cycle, so you need to be really careful on what type of investment you do and really to make sure you're making your money at the purchase. That's always the number one rule in real estate. Make your money at the purchase. Everyone talks about location, 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 and that is very true, but you really make your money at the purchase by doing your homework, understanding the market that you're in, and understanding the niche that you're in also, which is mobile home parks, what I'm talking about now. So people say, Mike, how can you make $100,000 from one mobile home park? It's super easy if you buy the right park. And again, you're looking for a park around 100 spaces. You're looking for a park that's lot rent only. There's some people in the industry that like to do more park-owned homes, which is more like a horizontal apartment complex, in my opinion. I would avoid that at all costs. I think you buy apartment complexes if you want to be in that type of business. My business is all about renting the dirt. I'm only in charge of the roads, the pipes, and some of the exterior maintenance in some of the park areas, like the common areas. The residents own their own homes. They're in charge of all the maintenance. I don't have any full-time maintenance people at any of my parks, which is awesome for me, and it allows my expense ratio to be maybe 35% to 40% of my total investment, whereas if you're in an apartment complex, it's closer to 50, 55%. So there's a big advantage with parks. But more important, I think, is if you reinvest in these parks, you're going to find that these clientele are really loyal. And if you look at an apartment complex, which is, transitory in nature, you're going to find that the turnover every year is somewhere around 50%. And that's understandable. 50% of the people are going to move in, 50% are going to move out. In a mobile home park, the average is closer to 25 or 30%, just because people tend to be long-term, they own their homes, they can't really afford to go anyplace else because it costs 6 to 10 grand to move a house. They're not going to do that. So they're going to stay put. But if you really run the parks correctly, you reinvest, you make sure the streets look really good, you pave them every couple years, you make sure the tree trimming's done, you put in a playground, you put in a soccer field, you hold resident appreciation days a couple times a year. It is amazing what's going to happen with your park. Last year, we averaged just over 11% turnover, which is phenomenal. And that really saves us money. I don't have any full-time maintenance guys, as I said, at any of my parks. And we have over 25 parks right now. So we can contract everything out because we're not responsible for the homes and we don't have constant turnover. Okay, so I jumped into mobile home parks from the apartment business. I spent about 4 or 5 years doing mid-sized apartment complexes in Orlando, Florida. Did very well with that, sold all the properties in 2006. And I stumbled across this niche of mobile home park investing. And I think it was from Mobile Home Park University. I'm not quite sure where I got the information, but I'd never seen a mobile home park in my entire life. I didn't really know what it was. I'd never been inside of one. I didn't understand it at all. But once I understood it, there was really more about cash flow and renting the dirt versus managing people and maintenance people and all those types of things. I really liked it. And so I jumped into my first property in Orlando, Florida. It was a little 80-space park on 4 acres, if you can believe that. You could reach your hands out the window and touch your neighbor if you wanted to. So it was a small park. Didn't really know what I was doing. But again, I took some action, which I highly recommend everybody do. You know, that paralysis by analysis, you got to avoid it at all costs. You got to be able to take some action after you do your due diligence. And we jumped into it, and my operations guy, who's Chris Berry, who's still my COO today, he really liked the mobile home parks better than the apartments just because it was easier to manage. He felt we could grow a lot bigger with, you know, not that many employees. And we have 4,000 spaces now, and we only have 12 employees. And that's, you know, versus an apartment, we'd probably have triple that. So once we got into the apartment, or the mobile home parks, we were like excited. And when we sold all the apartments, we 1031 the money into, we couldn't reinvest in Florida at that point in time, so we went to North Carolina. And that's where we started to really learn the business, the difference between lot rents and park-owned homes. And we ended up buying 5 parks over a period of time. And the first question people ask me is, where do you find the parks, Mike? You can go online. There's a couple of places like Mobile Home Park Store or LoopNet or things like that. But the number one place where I find all my deals is through brokers. You need to wine and dine the brokers in the industry. There aren't that many of them. Find your niche in the country. I happen to be in the Southeast and the Midwest. Other people are out west. Some people are, you know, up in the Northeast. I know all the brokers in my area. I know them well. They know that I'm a closer, that if it's a good deal, that I will close on the deal. So I really court those brokers. And their job is to call all these mom and pop owners. And if you think about it, there's 50,000 mobile home parks in the country, and there's tons still of mom and pop owners that bought the park or built the park in the early 70s. They've kept it forever. Now they're getting close to retirement. They don't really know what to do. The kids, for the most part, their kids, typically want the money. They don't want the park, which is unfortunate from their standpoint. But it's a great opportunity still to find these mom and pop owners through the brokers. And the number one thing that these mom and pop owners do is they keep the rents really low. I bought a park recently, about a year ago, in Raleigh here. Beautiful park, 225 spaces. The lot rents were $255. Raleigh's a $395 market. I bumped the rent $70, which is a lot, and probably the max you can get away with in one bump. But that $70 was over $14,000 the bottom line. That's the type of deal you want to be able to do. And as I've talked about in some of the other investing, you know, you really want to look for a 10 cap in mobile home parks if at all possible. But I'm willing to go down to a 7 or 8 cap if I know I can bump my rents $50 to $70 within the first couple years. And a lot of times over 5 to 7 years, I'm going to bump my rents $100 on 200 units. You know, that's $20,000 a month. That'll get your 7 or 8 cap to a 10 to 12 cap very quickly. And as Frank and Dave do really well, and they talk about at Mobile Home Park University and Mobile Home Park Store and their boot camps, I would encourage you to go to some of them. I think they're really good. You can definitely get a cash-on-cash 20% in this industry if you do it right. If you buy it right, if you understand that rents are low, you buy a park that's probably 65 to 70% occupied, maybe up to 80, so you can add 10 or 15 homes. There's really a tremendous amount of upside in the business, but you got to run it right. And what we've developed is a playbook, basically, where we find sort of the same type of park, and we call it distressed. And it's either distressed for low rents, or it's distressed because the former owner ran it into the ground, which is unfortunately true in a lot of cases. And there's a lot of ways where you can take that. With our playbook, you basically take that park from a very underperforming 2-star park, get it to a 3.5-star park within 12 months. And that basically means you're going to have to pave all the roads. Freshly paved roads in a park are huge, in my opinion. Number 2 is you're going to get all the bad guys out. You got to make sure everybody's background checked, no drug dealers, that type of stuff. And the great thing about a park, obviously, is that everybody tends to know each other, so you can find out who the bad guys are fairly quickly. Number 3 is add some value to the park. Put a playground in, put a soccer field in, whatever the people, a walking path, whatever it may be. Add some value to the park. Frank and Dave had a great idea recently about putting solar lamp posts in and some vinyl fences. Just little things like that that add up to a lot. And it also, once you do your playbook over 90 days, it allows you to bump the rent. And they're not as opposed to bumping the rent as long as they see that you're taking care of the park. So that's the beautiful thing about the playbook. And I can go through example. As one of the parks that we bought in foreclosure in 2012, we bought for $25,000, a 65-space park, fixed it up. I just sold it for $525,000 this year. So there's a lot of examples like that. Now, you're not going to get those foreclosure deals as much anymore because we're at the top of the cycle, but there's a lot of ways to find those low rents and those parks that are maybe 30 to 40% vacant where you can bring in new homes. I'd strongly recommend you look at Clayton's new cash program. It started to really work well for us, where you can add new homes for very low cost. Adding 10 to 15 new homes to a new park is a part of every park that we do now, especially you sprinkle them in front, make some of the older houses not look so bad. And the other tip I would make, too, is really encourage your residents to paint their homes. We typically will pay for half of it. If it's $400, we'll pay for $200. They pay for $200. It really brightens up the park, and again, it allows them to take some more ownership and some more pride in the community. The other thing we always do too is put in new mailboxes, assuming they're not brand new. New mailboxes look good. We put in a bus stop for the kids, and then I think the resident appreciation days. I can't say enough about that. When you bring in a DJ and a bouncy house and some pizzas, that reduces turnover in the park, and we all know reduced turnover means more money in your pocket. As I talked about, we averaged just over 11% last year, which is awesome. Now, some years are going to be more than others. Something happens with people. But if you can keep that ratio below 20, you're going to make a ton of money. Your expense ratio is going to be more in the 35% range instead of the 40% range, and that 5% extra expenses is going to go right into your pocket. So strong fundamentals in the business. Let's talk about it. Supply and demand. Look for the brokers. You can go online. Mobile Home Park Store occasionally has got some deals there, but really work the brokers and find these parks. You want to find a distressed park. You want to find one that rents. Know the rents in your markets. I'm in all the big cities. That's one other thing I should talk about. I'm only investing in parks that are within 30 minutes of any big city. They have to be within a short drive to those big cities. And really why I say that is because multifamily, whether it be apartments or mobile home parks, all about employment. What you don't want to do is be in a one-employer or two-employer town. Believe me, I was there at one point in time, and one of the big employers shut down, and it was a little bit scary, and I had to get out of that park, and I would never make that same mistake again. So invest in the bigger cities if you can. Choose your markets, whether it be in the Midwest, Southeast, whatever it may be. Texas is a great market. Get 4 or 5 big cities and look for those parks. Obviously, if they're within the metro area, they're going to go for a higher price right now because the land tends to be more valuable. But there's a lot of parks within 15 to 30 minutes outside of these big cities. That's where you want to be. The cities are going to grow out there. And though that park is going to be very valuable from a land standpoint, but also your residents have access to a lot of employment. So don't forget that. But when you start looking at everything involved, and it only takes a 100-space park, when you look at the math and say, if you can get a park that the lot rents are $250 and you can raise them to $300 right away in 100 spaces, that's $5,000 a month that goes right to your bottom line. That's $60,000 a year. You're already halfway there to getting your $100,000 a year. So finding the park and making your money at the purchase, number one rule in real estate, you can't forget that. The other things that you want to take a look at in park are the public utilities versus private utilities. I was really afraid of the private utilities for a long time. I wouldn't encourage it on your first deal until you get more comfortable. Public utilities are ideal, and that means public water, public sewer. Now, you're still going to be responsible for those pipes, and you're going to have a lot of leaks because you got to remember the infrastructure is old at a lot of these parks. And I think that's a dirty little secret in the business. You're going to need more capital than you think just to manage the pipes underground. And I've talked to a lot of guys who've gotten in the business in the last couple of years, a lot of big money guys, and they say they didn't understand how much money that they were going to have to invest in the infrastructure, especially below the ground. So be careful of that. Overestimate when you're doing your financial projections or your budgets. You're going to need more money for the underground pipes than you think you're going to need. But once you start looking through that and you see if you can get public utilities, I'd still go that way. Private utilities are a whole nother game. Septics, well, they're definitely doable. I have a couple myself. It's definitely minority of the portfolio, but there's a couple great deals where I've had septics. In septics, I would say you only want to do that when the park has a lot of space, where there's typically 2 to 3 homes, maybe 4 homes per acre, like a subdivision. Because if one of those septic fields fail, you can always move that field somewhere right near that house. And there's a lot of new technology now where you can make the new septic field a lot smaller than the old one, so you don't need that much space. But be very wary of older parks that have the homes very close together that have septics. That could create a nightmare. You might have to go to a wastewater treatment plant, which is going to cost you anywhere from $250 to $700,000. You don't want to do that if at all possible. So septics only on bigger parks, so they're spread out. I got a couple wells as well. You know, the private water is not the greatest thing, but you turn it over to an operator who comes there almost every day, does the testing, is responsible for reporting to the state. I'm not as afraid of it as I once was. Again, I prefer public utilities, but if it's a great deal, and there's a park over in the Charlotte area that I just bought that the lot rents were super low, it happened to have private utilities, I wasn't going to pass on that deal. It's a 20% cash on cash going into it day one, and I know I can get that up to 30%, which is almost unheard of in this day and age. But it's just one of those situations where you have to cross that threshold. But I'd be careful about that, especially in your first couple deals. Don't do that. Stay with public at all costs. The final thing that I really want to talk to you about, and I think the great thing for beginning investors in mobile home park space, is that there's a lot of seller financing out there. And as you all know, the biggest issue is about getting money. One side note is, talking about other people's money is, and I really believe if you're going to be a syndicator in the business and an operator, I would be both. We manage all our own properties. I would never turn it over to a third-party manager. I don't believe in that at all. But if you're going to be a syndicator and raise money, Craig Haskell at Value Hound has a great program on how to be a syndicator, what's the right way, especially legally, to stay within the guidelines of doing that. So I would really, take a look at his program and try to understand how it is to raise money. But the beauty of the mobile home park industry, there's a lot of mom and pops that they understand that they don't want to take a huge tax hit right when they sell this park. And they're looking for retirement income for the next 10 or 15 years. So they're willing to seller finance these deals, unlike a lot of the apartments in some of the bigger mobile home parks where they're going to want to cash out right away. So it's a real advantage for a small investor, a new investor, to get in the space. And I would every deal I would throw out a seller finance alternative. They may not take it, but a lot of them will look at it. And I probably have 4 or 5 of my parks right now that are seller finance because the sellers understand, the good sellers, that the banks are a little bit leery. They've gotten a lot better about things, but the banks are a little bit leery about financing these deals because they don't understand. The banks like the brick and mortar of the apartment complexes. They don't understand the raw land and the depreciating trailer. They don't get that a little bit. So I would strongly look for seller finance deals. I'd look for public utilities. I'd pound on these brokers to find your park. And when you just run the math on a 100-space park, that it's $250 lot rent now, and you get it up to $300, and you put an extra $6,000 or $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year into your pocket, it's easy to make $100,000 from one park. I would also caution you, there's no such thing as an absentee landlord anymore. You need to stay on top of your properties. I would encourage you on your first couple deals to buy properties within 3 or 4 hours of your house, just so you can get there on a Saturday morning if you have to. Your second, third deal, it's easy to manage them once you get comfortable. You can buy them in other states and do some of those things. And I know if you're in California watching this, you understand that it's almost impossible to buy a park in California, so you're going to have to go outside, and that's definitely the case. But I would be the closer you are to your first park, the more you're going to learn, the more you're going to understand what's happening. And the other thing I would say, if you're going to go out of state, make sure that there's a very limited amount of park-owned homes. Park-owned homes create a lot of turnover. And if you do rentals, things like that, it's a whole another part of the business that we can talk about at some other time. But I avoid the park-owned homes if I can. Right now, of the 3,700 homes that we have on our sites, I own less than 10%. I'd like to own 0, but it's not going to happen anymore the way the financing is. Clayton's going to make that a little bit more available where I can even get that down to maybe 5%. But I just don't want to be in the ownership business because of what we talked about. So there's great opportunities in the mobile home park business. It does well during the good times and the bad times. I wouldn't say it's fully recession-proof, but it does very well. But you got to stay on top of it. You can't just ignore it and think it's going to run like a franchise or something like that. You need to stay on top of it. You need to stay on top of your manager. The great news is there's a lot of great technology. Rent Manager is a great software program that we use. We have a scanner at all our managers' desks where they never take any cash. It's all money orders. They scan them right into the bank, so they never have to go to the bank. Little things like that that'll make it very easy. And obviously cameras now. and you can basically see online what's going on all over your park all the time. So it makes it a lot easier to manage out of state, but stay closer. It's going to make your life a little bit easier. But it's definitely doable to make $100,000 from 100 space mobile home park. There's going to be mistakes along the way. Make sure you budget a little bit more for the pipes, because it's hard to do due diligence on that. You don't know what's exactly down there. You can measure it from past water bills, but always overestimate what you're going to need for that, because there's issues, leaks are going to happen all the time. You can overcome that problem, but it's something that you need to be aware of. And I think, again, it's a dirty little secret of the business that people don't talk about as much. They spend a lot more money investing in the pipes and the infrastructure of the park just because these properties are so old. But I encourage you to start talking to these brokers, start driving to some parks, look around, talk to some owners, go to some of the conferences. It's a great business opportunity. If you're looking to get out of corporate America and you say, hey, all I need is $100,000 a year, you can get it with one mobile home park. Or you can get it with 2 50-space parks. And again, the niche, I think, right now is buying these 50 to 100-space parks. None of the big guys want anything below 100. And there's a lot of parks between 50 and 100 spaces. You get 2 or 3 together, 50 to 75 spaces each, and all of a sudden you got 150, 200 spaces. You can easily be making 150, 200 grand a year. So it's great for corporate America if you want to do that. So now that we've talked about some of the fundamentals of the mobile home park industry, let me talk you through some of the examples of some of the parks that I've purchased over the last 5 to 7 years. I think that'll give you a better understanding when we go through actual parks, and you can see what the mistakes that I made. Hopefully you can avoid them. And then you can see some of the things that I did correct that will help you when you decide to purchase your first park. So let's talk about the first park I purchased. Back in 2005, it was called Oak Hill Mobile Home Park in Lakeland, Florida. And I was in the apartment business at that point in time, so I didn't really know anything about the mobile home park business. I'd read basically one manual on the whole business and decided to jump into it. And the reason I did, as we talked about, is lower maintenance cost, easier to manage, better cash flow, and more sense of community because people don't leave as often. So we bought this little 80-space park, 4 acres it was on, 80 spaces, if you can believe that. You could reach out your window and basically touch your neighbor's trailer. It was that small. But we bought the park, we jumped into it, and the biggest thing I did is I took action. I understood the fundamentals, I understood the tax flow aspects of it, I understood the cash flow aspects of it. I knew it was going to be a good deal. I knew it was going to cash flow from day one, and there was a few empty trailers there, so I knew there was some upside. What I didn't know is that the park was a 55-plus park at the time, and it was transitioning into a family park. And so we went through the documents with the state of Florida to get that done. And the reason was where the park was located, there weren't any more interest from seniors coming up from up north. Things had changed. So we went through that process. We got all the homes filled, and the park cash flowed really well. The problem was, in the meantime, I'd sold all my apartments in the Orlando area, and we were transitioning up to North Carolina. So we decided to sell the park. We only owned it 9 months, and we still made 75 grand on it. So it goes back to the fundamentals that we talked about. You make your money at the purchase. We bought it at the right price. The cash flow was great. It cash flowed from day one. And it had some upside. There was 4 or 5 of the 80 trailers that were empty. It was an easy first deal for us. Public water and sewer, pretty simple. We had to go through some hoops to get through the senior transition to a family park, but it was very doable overall. So that first park, what spurred me on to say, okay, now I'm out of the apartment business. I really want to get into the mobile home park business. And then I went into more deals. The first park I bought in North Carolina was in Siler City, North Carolina. And the park was called Country Living Estates and was a great park, mostly Hispanic, fairly new homes. It was probably 45 minutes from Raleigh, which when I learned after the fact it was a little bit too far from Raleigh. The people tended to work in different areas. The negative that I made in that park were 2 things. Number one, Siler City is a town of about 10,000 people with 2 big employers. One of those big employers went out a year after I bought the park, in which it forced me to sell it because I didn't want to get caught with that park and no big employers. So I'll talk about that in a second. But the biggest mistake I made was at the purchase. I didn't understand when you buy a park that you separate the lot rent income from the home income. And when you do evaluation. So the lot rent income everybody wants because it's stable, steady income. And you're going to get a lower cap rate for that, somewhere around 8, maybe 7 right now, it depends. But on the home income, where people are making payments for their homes, eventually they're going to pay that off. Now our experience has been that maybe 1/3 of the people paid off and the others just tend to leave and never pay off their home, and we get it back for whatever reason. But in this particular park, it was a very tight-knit Hispanic community, and they ended up paying up almost all their homes, which was a little bit scary. But I paid a 9 cap for the whole park instead of separating it out, and there was a lot more home income than I was used to. I assumed you just lumped it all together like an apartment deal, so that was a big mistake. When I look back on it now, the park turned out to be great for me cash flow wise. It was ridiculous. It was direct build, city sewer and water, so I had nothing to do with that. It was a newer park, a lot of newer homes, always 100% occupied. Where I got into problems is that I overpaid for it. I paid a little over $4 million for it, and I realized quickly as I got more experience in the business that I did overpay for it, and I was fortunate to find another buyer to do that. In turn, 5 years later, when they went to refinance that deal, they got a valuation of $2.5 million because almost everybody had paid off their homes and the lot rent income was all that was left. So that's a big mistake you want to avoid. I was fortunate to get out of it. And obviously the second mistake is don't be in the small towns. 45 minutes is too far away from a big city. I should have been, within 15 to 30 minutes tops, so all the employment is accessible for these people. Siler City, they had a big chicken plant, went out of business, and then after I sold it, a year later, the other chicken plant went out of business, so it put a big strain on the park overall. So 2 lessons I learned from my second park that I had ever purchased, my first one in North Carolina. After I bought a couple parks in North Carolina, all that were distressed, and I decided I was going to sell everything in 2011. And the reason I did that is because I've heard through the grapevine, through the contacts I had with a lot of the brokers that I work with. Again, I'll stress, most of your deals are going to come from brokers. So I have tight relationships with a lot of them. They said a lot of distressed parks that went bad and went back to the bank in 2008, 2009 were going to come due finally in 2012. So at the end of 2011, I packaged up my parks. They were, really great parks. I was doing well. Cash flow was good. Really wasn't working much at all. But I had this sense that I could really do a lot better. And so I sort of rolled the dice a little bit, and I sold everything at the end of 2011, waiting for these deals to come. Well, in 2012, it finally took 6 months before I got my first portfolio deal. I bought it from Bank of America in June of 2012. And it was interesting buying a distressed portfolio deal just because you had to buy all 6 parks, and there was a little bit of hair on each park. You didn't really know what you were getting. There was some due diligence, but I knew on a couple of the parks the prices were great. And typical with a portfolio, you can't be afraid of some of the bad parks in order to get some of the good parks. So I bought all 6. I was the high bidder. They were all in North Carolina, so it was easy to do. And it was interesting, this one park that I didn't really want, the bank ended up throwing into me for $25,000. And I talked about it a little bit before. That park I just sold for $525,000. So it's interesting when you get this park that had the first wastewater treatment plant I dealt with, and it also had a well. And I was like, oh, I don't want it. There was only 19 residents out of 65. I thought it was going to be a nightmare. Turned out to be a huge home run. Cash flowed every month. But I was afraid of it because I'd never had private utilities before. I didn't know. Again, in a portfolio deal, you can only do so much due diligence. So you really need to be careful about that. But the beauty of it, of those 6 parks, I've kept 2 of them, which were the best parks over by Charlotte. I've gotten rid of the other ones, and the other ones I all made a ton of money. They cash flowed every month. It was a great experience for me and allowed me really to steamroll my portfolio and go from basically 0 parks at the start of 2012 to 4,000 spaces right now, 3,700 residents and things like that. So learning from a portfolio deal, I would definitely not shy away from it. The money is definitely available, and we'll talk about that for the next deal. The second portfolio deal I bought started in the middle of 2012, and I thought I was going to get it, and it was from a big French bank. They only had 1 office in New York, and somehow they got involved in a mobile home park loan, and there was 10 parks involved in the loan. It was fairly substantial, and we were all set to close at the end of the summer 2012, and everything fell apart. The bank couldn't get the deals together, and the sellers who were all in foreclosure couldn't get the proper signatures. So that deal never closed until the following April. I spent over a year working on that deal, but it was a home run deal by far. I kept 7 of the parks, spun off 3 of them to some of my buddies, and kept the 7 core parks that I wanted, and those parks have been ridiculously good deals. I got them well. The thing that I didn't have at the time is I didn't have a lot of the money to be able to do the deals. like I talked about earlier, doing Craig Haskell's Value Hound program and really understanding how to get other people's money, I started to ask around and said, hey, are people interested in this business? And I sort of had a track record going. I published my first book at that point in time, and it was amazing how much money was available. People looking for steady, stable returns with some upside. And I typically pay people between 10 to 12% interest on a monthly basis. I would strongly encourage you to pay monthly checks to your investors. They love that stuff, especially the retirees. And I'd also strongly recommend that you look at IRA money. There's a lot of self-directed IRA money that's looking for a steady return with some upside. And when I went to do this big portfolio deal, which has really changed my whole career with the mobile home parks, I didn't have quite enough money to get it done, and I started reaching out a little bit before the deal got done, and it was amazing how much money came to you. So as I look back on that, what I did correctly through the years is I sort of traded up. I kept selling parks after a couple years, or in the case of the apartments, I did the same thing, and I developed a track record where I owned things for a couple years and I sold them for a nice profit, and they cash flowed the whole time. And when I went to extend myself to other people, I had that track record to show them. And I think that's the number one thing you want to do if you really want to get big in the business, is develop some type of track record. And that involves buying some smaller properties first, selling in, and sort of selling up into larger properties. As I talk about, you only need one park, 100 spaces, to make $100,000 a year, so maybe you don't want to do anything more than that. You certainly don't have to get crazy like I've done and gotten a lot more stuff. But if you do want to do that, you're going to have to sell up a little bit. And that's what I really learned from the portfolio deal. Not only was it a home run deal because I bought it at the right price, it was distressed in the marketplace, and the difference between 2013 and 2015 is like night and day what those properties are worth. Now let me talk about one of the recent deals I did a little bit over a year ago. I bought a 225 space park in Raleigh. And obviously Raleigh's a great market. It's probably one of the hottest cities going in the country right now. And the park that I bought, I ended up in a bidding war with another group, which was fairly typical. And I lost the bidding war because I felt like the people overbid for it. And I told the seller, they're going to try to retrade you. And I explained to the seller, who was a mom and pop seller, who had the park paid off, that this is going to happen. And sure enough, at the very last second, this group came in and said, hey, we'd love to do the deal, but we need to do it for $500,000 less. Thank God the seller was true to their word. They came back to me. I was able to get the deal done. And what was great about this deal was that the lot rents were very low. And in Raleigh marketplace, the lot rents are anywhere from $375 to $425. Here, the lot rents were $255. Mom and pops tend to get comfortable. They're making decent money. They don't have loans on the deals, so they keep the lot rents lower. And what I was able to do in that deal is come in and day one, raise lot rents $70. I think 70 is probably a little high from my experience because I had a bunch of people grumbling. Now, don't get me wrong, nobody left, and the park is 100% occupied today, and we've added a few more homes to get it almost 100% occupied physically. But I think $50 is the right amount to do it. So if you see a park where the lot rents are low, I think you can get away with a $50 jump pretty easily. Residents sort of expect when you take over, they know that they have low rates or a pretty good deal. They may fight you or grumble a little bit, but they're going to pay. And as we know from experience, they're not going to move their trailers. They don't have the money. There's no parks anywhere they can go. All the parks in the area are filled, and a lot of them have been scraped, as we know, for future development or retail development or whatever it may be. So the great deal that I got was because of these low rents. And now as we go into 2016, we're looking to raise those rents again a little bit and bump them on an annual basis. Only 2 or 3%. But as I see the value of that property going from $255 in lot rents to over the next 5 years, $375 plus, there's a huge amount of equity that's been created by that deal. So the patience in me, I lost out the deal the first time because I got outbid, dramatically outbid in the final bid, which I thought was ridiculous. And I told the seller that they were going to get retraded. And again, if you explain to the seller what retrading is, they get very mad at the person who's doing the retrading because they try to be honest with everybody up front and do the thing. So I was fortunate that they came back to me, worked out a deal. It's been one of the great deals. And to be in Raleigh is like awesome. But I would add, the tricky part of that deal, too, is that there were septics. And again, I'm not a big fan of the private utilities, but in this case, the deal was so good, you have to take it. And the septics have proved to be no problem. We've had them pumped right off the bat, all of them, just to make sure. We had one or two that were leaky, so we replaced them right off the bat, and you can do that for $5 or $6 grand, so it's not a big deal. So don't be afraid of the private utilities as you go down the road. Your first deal, strongly recommend public utilities, but as you get more confident and you really understand things, if it's a great deal and it has private utilities, don't pass on it. The final deal I want to talk to you about is, a deal that I just did recently, and it shows sort of where we are in the marketplace. And it's a deal I bought in Jacksonville, Florida a year ago. It was a 175 space park, and there was about 104, 105 homes in there, but there was only 82 occupied. It was an older couple, 83, 84 years old, that still ran the park every day. And you're going to run into that all the time. Those are the perfect buyers. They kept the lot rents low. They tend not to fill the homes because they just don't want any problem type people, or they just don't want to take a risk. And so when we bought the park, I had to pay a broker, and what actually wasn't a licensed broker, it was somebody who found the deal for me, $300 grand in a finder's fee. And I was like, whoa, that seems a lot. I'm going to be outpriced in this market. But when I ran the numbers, and again, when I do the numbers, I do them on a one-page spreadsheet. And it's super easy. I know what the cash flow is going to be. I'm looking for something that's going to be 15% cash on cash day one, and within 9 to 12 months, I want to get it over 20%. Otherwise, I'm not going to do the deal, period. That's just the way it is. And the way I'm going to get it to over 20% is primarily by raising rents or by filling some empty units. Raising rents is number one, obviously, because it's the easiest thing to do. And so in that Jacksonville park, what we were able to do is we filled all the vacant homes. There was about 18 vacant homes, and it was just a pure example of them being sort of lazy and not trying to make the effort. We filled them within probably 8 weeks because the demand was that good. And then we raised the rents $50 according to Florida law. You got to give them 4 months notice and stuff like that. So all of a sudden we created a lot more equity. And within a year, I had people banging on my door saying, hey, we love Jacksonville market. We want to buy your park. And I have 109 homes in there of a 170 space park. So it's not like it's full by any means, maybe 60% occupied. And I was able to sell that park for $2 million more than I bought it for a year ago. And even though I was afraid of paying the $300,000 to the broker and whatever, I went back to the sheet that I did all my analytics on. Again, one page, very simple. And the numbers worked pretty well after paying the broker the finder's fee for $300 grand. So I was comfortable. Now, the people who bought the park, I think, overpaid. I don't understand the numbers. If you're holding it for a long-term period of time, it's definitely going to work, but it's going to be very tight for a couple years. And it sort of shows where we are in the marketplace right now. We're definitely in the 7th or 8th inning. Things are very frothy. Everybody's chasing yield. So if you have a park that you've had for a couple years, it might be a good time to sell and upgrade to a higher park. Again, you got to be more careful because the deals are harder to find on the other end. But when you're looking for your first park right now, just be careful. Make sure you understand that 15% cash on cash, trying to get it to 20%. You want something with upside. You want something near a bigger residential area or bigger metro area. And you don't want to take a huge risk. If the numbers don't work right now, you need to stay away from the deal. The last thing that I'd really stress for you about these parks, or the mobile home communities as we call them, is you need to reinvest in your parks. You can't treat it like a slum landlord and take all the money out and not create a really nice community for your people. We typically reinvest anywhere from 50 to 70 grand a month right now, whether it be paving roads, putting in soccer fields, putting in playgrounds, adding brand new homes from Clayton through their cash program. Whatever it may be, we're constantly looking to upgrade the program and upgrade the park to make it a better place. Typical of an apartment complex, you're going to get 50% turnover. Last year, our turnover was around 11% because we're trying to create communities, and people don't want to leave communities. They get relationships, they understand who the manager is, they get stability, and we tend to keep it affordable for people, although the rents are definitely going up, but along with the market. So it can be a win-win for everybody. So I stress to you, reinvest in the parks. It's going to pay off in the long run, not only in the value you receive long term, but in the short term, your cash flow is going to be a lot better because you're going to get a lot less turnover. I hope this information on real estate investing has been helpful for you. You can find me at mainstreetmillionaire.com. You can check out my book, Unconventional Wealth, on Amazon. You can find out about my own properties at acgmhc.com. Everything that I talked about is very doable. There's always going to be hiccups in any type of business or any type of investing, but I encourage you, the number one thing you have to do is take action. That's what it's all about. Do your homework, take some action, and you're going to do well. Thanks for having me today.